And we're ready.
Okay, so that annoying platitude, oh my gosh, guys, thank you so much for your feedback. It was super helpful. By which I mean, quite seriously, it was incredibly helpful. Thank you. You guys all really gave us stuff to think about and how we might want to shape this second half of the class from here to the end of the year. The first observation several people made was that it would be helpful to refer you to resources outside of Common Sense Education in addition. So we're going to be really thoughtful about that beginning with today. That's a great suggestion. We're familiar with some that are wonderful, and we'll make sure we put those in the mix for you. As we've said, there are moments where Common Sense Education may not be the best match for you. And as I hope you'll hear repeatedly during the day today, if you read it and it strikes you as something that's worth talking about and you talk about it, that is the work. Who cares what the content is? All we need to do is get kids engaged in the conversation, and you're doing 90% of the work. Second one was a bunch of questions about how to integrate this into the classroom, which was a great point, having to do with opportunities that might exist to have conversations, not just in the context of a digital citizenship conversation like you might have with advisory, but more broadly with students in other classes as well. And so we'll try to give you some examples of that today. We're also going to put a particular emphasis on opportunities that exist to utilize the tools we're using with students. And as an example, towards the end of the day today, we'll do an Edu protocol that works really nicely for what we're doing, but we think will also work for a bunch of different contexts that we hope you'll try it out and see how it works there as well. Two people observed that there was not a particularly clear distinction between where we were taking material directly from Common Sense Education and where we were kind of inventing the wheel. And so we've tried to really highlight that today in particular, but going forward, we're going to work with a pattern where the first lesson is very close to Common Sense Education, the middle one is a little further away, and the last one is sort of inspired by true events, inspired by the Common Sense Education model, but taken, kind of our own point of view. So where we're doing that, we'll try to be more specific about it. But again, with this caveat that there is zero, there is nothing magical about what Kate and I are doing. We are offering our perspective, our experience with this, but if it is feeling intimidating to you, like I need to do it that way, we hope that both in what we're demonstrating and in our saying it directly, there is nothing magic about it. We are just doing what seems right to us as classroom teachers, and it'll only be effective with your kids if it feels authentic to you. So nothing that looks like imitation or your efforts to do it a way that you've seen it done is going to be more important than doing it in the way that works for you. So just hold on to that confidence and kind of work from the place of, all right, I know what's going to happen for these kids is blah. And Kate will give you a hilarious example of that today, where she read something, she was like, oh no, not saying that in my classroom. And she's trusting her instinct on that. And that's exactly what we encourage you to do. One other note about today's content, it's not quite NSFW, but you will find that in many of the topics we discuss, there is the possibility that conversation with students would go south fast. And what we want to observe for you as much as possible is that this subject is a great one to co-teach, to have some collaboration and preparation for, to have some tools in your toolbox ready to deal with sort of, curveballs that you get. But from the get-go, Kate's going to look at sextortion and sexting, right? And it's a critical conversation, but pretty fast you may be in water that doesn't feel comfortable to you as a math teacher, as an English teacher, as a person. And so having some awareness of that and some preparation for it will really help you navigate it. My experience with it has been that co-teaching piece with a guidance counselor, with a health teacher, can be invaluable in kind of balancing that and giving me more insight and a better experience for the kids. Before we launch into the content, though, we did want to highlight something that we've mentioned, but I don't think we've really shown you an example of, And in this instance, the particular materials that are in place for engaging families are excellent. So we had mentioned to you that one of the ways to approach this whole subject is with family support, with kind of turning outside the walls and saying, hey, community, how might you also engage your kids? And how might we as a town, as a group of towns, kind of address questions that are arising, not just inside the school, not just inside the school day. And we were particularly struck that the materials that Common Sense Education offers for this question of relationships, which is today's subject, are really good. So writ large, this warning about do not attempt this alone is, of course, whatever you feel comfortable with, do it with your kids alone, great. But be aware that in partnership with families, in partnership with other teachers in your building, co-teaching these things, combining groups of advisories, we think you may have a better experience, particularly as it pertains to today's subject. One of the things you might utilize, Common Sense Education offers a curriculum letter pre-written that you can edit however you want, as always, that goes out and says, hey, families, we're going to be talking about this. We wanted to make you aware. You'll find, and if you sort of kind of focus on this as we're talking, I guess you're right, it could be possible that this issue would potentially raise people's concerns. For example, sexting is in the 8th grade curriculum. I had some immediate feedback as a middle school teacher. People were like, why are you talking about this right now? And I had some good answers at the ready, and we'll talk about what some of those were. But the awareness that we were going to be talking about it before it happened significantly reduced the blowback that I would have gotten if instead I'd been like, Tuesday morning, time to talk about sexting, and then the kids had gone home and families had not been aware that that's what had been going on. Sorry, that's each of the images in the slideshow takes you to the actual letter or the actual content, and I clicked on the wrong thing. There are a series of family activity guides that are relating to each of these subjects, and they're divided into one for 6-8 and one for 9-12, and there's one for each of the umbrella categories we've been talking about. But in this instance, again, depending on a parent's degree of comfort, just like they do for teachers, they will script for you. And there's a certain hilarity to me in sitting down and being like, let's read the sentences below at my dinner table, right? That's a little bit awkward, but some version of this, like what would happen if I shared a fake news story? Seems to me like a great conversation starter. And I think you can offer it to families as just a way in to these conversations. Again, learn to click the right thing, Werner. Sorry. The other one is the 9-12 resource, and it, as you'll see, is a little bit higher level questions, a little more complicated, a little tougher, but also great. How can online relationships be risky? What actions can we take to lessen that risk? Those kinds of questions posed at a dinner table, or we've done them with groups of parents, and I'd shared with Kate that we mixed it up sort of on a whim, and it turned out to be phenomenal. We put parents of one family with kids in another family in small groups, and the level of honesty and revelation was so much higher because it took out the baggage of mom, you know, or like the assumptions that were in place, and they each asked each other really genuine, thoughtful questions, and parents were so impressed. And to me, like, my heart was kind of warmed by the kids who were like, oh, I kind of get where my parents are coming from now. And as a parent myself, I was like, yeah, right, see, we know stuff. And it was great to have that, but the richness of the conversation was so much greater because of the interaction that were happening in a kind of parent-child role, but not within the same family systems. We're going to make this the focus of our whole conversation in a few months, but the SEL, social emotional learning curriculum that has just emerged in the last 6 months from Common Sense Education is extraordinary. It is so good. It is keyed to a different matrix of kind of subject headings. So there are 5, and they're a little different than the ones we've been talking about, but they are just lost where I was looking. Self-management, self-awareness, responsible decision-making, social awareness, and then this one, relationship skills, each of them with the caveat of in digital life. So we'll come back to all of these, but we wanted to just raise for you the possibility of exploring these as an extension of conversations. And you'll notice that some of these questions would work just as well in your classroom as they might in the home environment, but these are literal handouts that you can either email, print, share however you like with families, and just encourage them to have conversations that extend and relate to the ones you're having around your classroom tables. So we're hoping that that'll give you just kind of a glimpse of what's in there, and just the reminder that there's really, really good stuff created already with a constant assumption that you'll edit it in ways that make it work for you, but that exist as jump-starting tools to make sure that you're not the only ones banging this drum. And my experience at Cape Elizabeth has been that the transformative moments have happened when we're all on the same page. And when I can say to a parent, as we discussed, blah, 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 especially when it bears on disciplinary issues, knowing that choices that were being made that were less than appropriate or really problematic online are in the context of conversations that are already happening about that behavior, it doesn't feel retaliatory. It doesn't feel like gotcha. It feels like if this was an opportunity, he or she lost sight of that ball, let's get them back in. I know you guys use a restorative justice model. If you've already provided that context for what the expectations are, and that's been shared with families, wow, it went a long way towards diffusing some of those really more difficult conversations. And to that end, if you want to talk about authenticity and sort of feeling like it's in the water, this also struck us as an area for great opportunity for student content creation. So instead of scripting the questions for them or just pulling them, spend a class period writing the family activity. What could you guys do at home that would work well? That what feels to you like a conversation that you'd be comfortable having? Maybe it's to use some of the videos that we'll look at today and say, hey, mom and dad, let's watch this video together and talk about that third person, that other party's experience, distancing it from your own sort of anxieties and narrative within your family, but still talking about the central issues. So just encouraging them to lean into being the source of knowledge and honoring how much they know this and how personal their experiences are with it, as a way to generate more conversation within your classroom and to give them an opportunity to really feel invested in the conversations that they take home to families.
So this month's topic is relationships and communication. And this is the overarching essential question for this entire topic, K-12. So it's how can I communicate effectively and positively to build relationships? So I'm just going to share with you what Common Sense Education shares with educators about this topic, because as Jonathan said, this topic kind of can quickly go into a place that can make us kind of all uncomfortable. So Common Sense Education says, as the line between online and offline continues to blur, students reflect on how they can use intrapersonal and interpersonal skills to build and strengthen positive online communication and communities. They will explore common digital stressors and their influences on relationships. Students will also gain an understanding of how to communicate effectively online and how and why some topics and conversations can best lend themselves to certain mediums. We are going to talk a little bit about online relationships. And so Common Sense Education notes that we are trying to move beyond the idea of online predators, because the term online predator often conjures up the image of an adult at a computer screen waiting to lure an unsuspecting child. And this gets reinforced by the media, which is really problematic because it doesn't actually fit with the kinds of risky relationships that actually are more common for kids and teens. In reality, when online sexual solicitation does occur, it's more likely to be between two teens or between a teen and a young adult. So students will need support getting clarity on this misconception with distinguishing myth from reality when it comes to online sexual solicitation. Also, through real life scenarios and first-person testimonials, students get a chance in this unit to practice setting boundaries that they are comfortable with. So from sexting to grooming to controlling behavior, students learn about the potentially unhealthy behaviors that can result from online relationships. So with that said, we are going to jump into grade 8's lesson on sexting and relationships. So too much too soon or too little too late, a critical and a difficult conversation. This lesson deals with sexting, which is a sensitive topic that can be difficult for both teachers and students to discuss. So Common Sense Education says that you should or you might need to make modifications depending on your classroom. So like Jonathan said, this might be a lesson that you don't go at it alone. Maybe you invite someone from your guidance department to come in and support this conversation, or maybe a health teacher to come in and support this conversation. So think about the human resources that are available to you to support you and your students when having these conversations. Also, you might decide to have students work individually or in small groups rather than in a whole class setting. So again, just really think about what's going to make you and your students most comfortable. So this lesson starts with this first definition, which is the definition of self-disclosure. And self-disclosure is sharing private or personal thoughts and feelings with someone. And this can bring people closer together, right? But it can also be risky. It reminds me of the grade 7 lesson, which is actually on the idea of oversharing. So you could grab, there's a Teen Voices video from the 7th grade lesson and use that to maybe talk about self-disclosure and oversharing, because that can work to illustrate this idea of self-disclosure as well. Or you can just move right on to the next term, which is sexting. And it's a common type of self-disclosure. So sexting is defined as digital sharing of intimate images or videos with another person. Of course, it's a very private form of self-disclosure. So, we're going to tell our students here in this case that we're going to watch a video together about this topic and then have a discussion. Again, this discussion is a really sensitive topic, and Jonathan's going to speak about civil discourse later. But for now, Common Sense Education offers some guidance to us as educators. They say to explain to students that it is a very sensitive topic, and it's important that they be their most mature selves when discussing it. And so if you have existing classroom discussion norms, this is a perfect time to revisit those. And if you don't have discussion norms in your classroom, Common Sense Education actually offers some up to you to use with your students. So they are speak your truth, respect others' viewpoints, don't interrupt, and disagree respectfully. And of course, you can provide examples of what that might look like and sound like and clarify any questions have about those norms, but this is a great time to have norms for conversations on difficult topics.
I'm going to interrupt.
Oh, yes.
Don't interrupt. 3 quick things. One is we'll give you those 4 guidelines as a starting point a little later on when we talk about civil discourse. So if you missed them, speak your truth, respect others' viewpoints, don't interrupt, and disagree respectfully. That kind of forms the basis, but we'll expand on that in a little bit. Second, I meant to say, one of the reasons I co-teach is because as a male, having a female in the classroom, which I very frequently do, is a great balance. And it has addressed some really difficult questions where triggering has occurred in my classroom. So this content has resulted in like a total breakdown or some really intense feelings. And having that other person who can pull the student out, as Kate said, or just help address some of that and get the information about what happened into the hands of a supportive person within your kind of SEL framework can be great. And then I thought I'd give you a sort of hilarious / cringy moment as to why I really have become very aware of this. So we're talking about this, and within like maybe 60 seconds, a kid pulls out his phone and is like, "Mr. Warner, is this anything appropriate? Is this sexting?" And then we go down the road of like, "Oh, what about this one? This one," everyone pulling out their phones. So certain awareness that that's going to happen was helpful for my next conversation. We are not going to pull out our phones during today's conversation. We're going to talk more at a distance about this. And I said, I don't want to be the police. I don't want to help you figure out what's in this group context, what is and is not appropriate on your phone. But I'd love to talk to you about it sort of theoretically or looking at some examples together. Those kinds of moments that you can really only prepare for a fully through experience are the kinds of things that this subject tends to bring up, but also can really create meaningful conversation if you're ready for it.
And so this resource that we're going to share with you is one of the Teen Voices videos. Again, we've talked about how we love these because it creates that distance, but it opens up the conversation, which is the important part. We are not going to discuss this video after we watch it. I simply want us to view it together so that you know it's a resource sitting here in the slide deck that you could use with your students. Common Sense Education gives students a couple of reflection questions that could begin that conversation for you. But for now, we're going to watch this video and then keep moving through. So the lesson for ninth grade, which we're not going to dig into, offers this video that we are going to share with you because we think it is a really powerful tool just to offer up for conversation. So again, if you just have a few minutes or you just want to spark a conversation in your class about this topic, this video we think is a really great opportunity to do that. So Common Sense Education does offer some language around this video. They say, you could start with saying, think about what you share through digital media, text messages, social media, messaging apps, etc. How much of the real you comes through? How is the you that you present through digital media different from the you face-to-face? So if you've done the digital tattoo lesson with your students, this can build on that. And if you hadn't, this can actually invite that conversation as well. So they also say that you might want to explain that most people present a self online that is somewhat different from how they are online in real life. They might be more or less shy online or more or less casual. Most of the time, these differences are really not a big deal. However, when there are really big differences between someone's online self and who they are in real life, this can lead to risky situations. One gets me. All right. All right, but maybe you don't want to use a video here. So you could try this digital dilemma, which can be done as a whole class in small groups. And this one can actually even be done individually if you're not feeling like this is a topic for discussion that you're ready for. So this digital dilemma is about 16-year-old Alyssa and her boyfriend, Tyler. They have been boyfriend and girlfriend for 2 months. They both really like each other. They, of course, text each other a lot. They feel like they can share their feelings with each other. One night they're up late texting and Tyler starts flirting. And Alyssa feels really flattered because she likes Tyler too. And Tyler has heard from his older brother that to take that to the next level, he could ask Alyssa for something personal, but he wasn't really sure about doing this. And then their text message conversation is revealed where Tyler says maybe he would like to see a picture of Alyssa without her pajamas. And Alyssa responds that she doesn't know if she's really comfortable with that. And Tyler responds, it's not like I'm some random guy, you know how much I like you. So it does come, of course, with prompts for you to use with your students. What dilemma is Alyssa facing? What do you think she might be feeling? And why might this be a challenging situation for her? How could Alyssa handle this situation? Come up with as many ideas as possible, and then have the students highlight which option might lead to the most positive outcome. And of course, it also does that, extending the conversation. So it adds complicating scenarios. So this scenario mentions that Tyler's older brother said, you should take it to the next level. So how might that have influenced Tyler's behaviors here? Besides not asking in the first place, what could Tyler have done differently to avoid making Alyssa feel uncomfortable? And then what could Tyler say if he actually realizes in this conversation that Alyssa is uncomfortable with the request? So this is just another way to open up this conversation again. Common Sense Education, okay. Common Sense Education calls these feelings of being uncomfortable red flag feelings. And so here in red, I have highlighted this slide because I edited it. So I want you to see what I did, how I would change this in my classroom. There is no way I would stand in front of my students and say the words red flag feelings, because I'm pretty sure they would roast me for the rest of the semester about that, because they are used to the term red flags. So online, that is what we call when something happens on digital media that makes you feel uncomfortable, worried, sad, or anxious. And students are very, I think for the most part, they're very aware of what they call red flags. So when I saw that slide and saw red flag feelings, I said to Jonathan, no way, I've got to change that one immediately. So again, that's just a little note about what I would do differently here.
Yeah,
Also,
I'm having a red flag feeling
yeah,
about my
I know.
homework tonight. This is a great point, like not gonna go well.
Yeah.
Can you hear me okay in this? I'm sorry, I had to
Yeah.
switch because my sound was going up. Thanks.
And so I added a topic to this conversation because it is a topic that I have learned about through my own research in preparing for this conversation. And it's really worth talking about with students. And that is the topic of sextortion. So again, it's in red because I added it. The definition of sextortion is a form of online blackmail using nude images. The blackmail happens when someone actually threatens to share the private images if demands aren't met. And often the demands are money. Sometimes it's more images, but as you'll see, I have some statistics to share with you after this video that I'm going to share. And of course, it can lead to victims feeling isolated, embarrassed, and trapped.
Exactly.
So I have some, excuse me, hold on, my speaker notes are not catching up with everything else. Great. So some statistics from the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children about sextortion and why I think it's a conversation that we should be having with our students. Since 2016, the Cyber Tip Line has received over 262,000 reports of online enticement, which is the category that includes sextortion. Between 2019 and 2021, the number of reports involving sextortion more than doubled. And in an earlier analysis, the dominant motive of offenders was to get explicit images of a child, but reports from early 2022, it shows that 79% of the offenders were actually seeking money. And if this is happening to young people, of course, you can see how this would be very frightening for them, and they might not be willing to come forward, not understanding that this is what was happening to them.
I just want to name for us that you remember at the very beginning, Kate said that the emphasis has in the past been on sort of predatory behavior, the older people looking for younger, as that video depicts. What we know now is that it is really much more of an issue peer on peer. And this one grade level lesson is potentially skewing our perception overall that the K-12 subject matter has all of this really negative content. That is not the case, as you'll see hopefully in a moment. The other two are, I don't want to say lighter, but they don't have the same like emotional resonance, and they definitely get to really critical relationship and communication issues without going into I think we talked a little while ago about the idea of, do you emphasize the digital don'ts or the digital do's? So like, you shouldn't do that, you shouldn't do that is not an effective way to teach everything, but these are realities. So having ways to engage with this can be really valuable. For this lesson, those family conversations are gold because you're getting the conversation going, you're getting people talking about the really critical, deeply felt questions, but without trying to do that on your own. These next two, just to sort of name for you, I think will feel more within the wheelhouse of sort of traditional teachers and more sort of what you would feel made perfect sense in your classroom with a lot less support, a lot more independently. So I guess just simply to say, this is really important work. It isn't all the work. And hopefully now we can kind of all take a collective breath after all of that, and look at this with a broadened lens of what this idea of relationships and communication means in a digital context.
Yeah, okay, so we're gonna head into a lighter space, which is grade 11's lesson, connecting with digital audience. So how does context impact content, voice, and tone? I'm going to show you how I'm using the idea of a common sense education lesson in my own curriculum. So grade 11's lesson didn't actually really speak to me all that much, but I realized that I was teaching this essential question essentially in my classes without realizing it. So as Jonathan said at the beginning, this is like a little bit common sense education, a little bit how it's done in the classroom, how I kind of moved away from it a little bit. And again, just a reminder, it doesn't matter how you do it, just that you're having these conversations. So the essential question for this lesson is, how can we use code switching to enhance our communication with online audiences? So 11th grade is all about code switching, which is when you are changing your language, behavior, or appearance based on who you're with or where you are. And so, like I said, I realized I was actually doing a code switching lesson without calling it that, regarding how to write an email to a teacher, because I had started getting some pretty out there emails from my students, especially during hybrid teaching, when that's how we were really communicating with each other, and some pretty whack, which will make sense to you in a minute, Google Classroom comments from students. So if you've heard the term code switching before, it's probably been in the context of the original definition as defined by sociologists, which is when dual language speakers switch back and forth between their native language and one spoken by the majority. Pretty quickly after this original definition kind of came out and was accepted, sociologists noted that code switching actually also happened in populations that spoke only one language. So the term grew to include behaviors beyond multilingualism. So this includes changing our mannerisms, our tone of voice, and changing between formal English and the more relaxed vernacular. But the NPR blog and podcast titled Code Switch even looks at this term even more broadly. They say that many of us subtly and reflexively change the way we express ourselves all the time. We're hopscotching between different cultural and linguistic spaces and different parts of our own identities, sometimes within a single interaction. And I did include on the slide a link to this article by NPR called How Code Switching Explains the World. And they use this great example of Obama when he was our president, who's being recorded all the time, doing code switching in different contexts. So you can see how he's interacting with different people based on who he is interacting with. So daily, teens, of course, confront the challenges and opportunities of code switching in digital spaces at home and at school. So as I was researching this, I read about this example that made perfect sense to me. We know that our students communicate with each other through various apps, often on their phones. And so if when they step into our buildings and our classrooms, they are no longer able to use their phones to communicate, they then are code switching all day. And of course, when they leave our classrooms and our building, they switch right back to communicating with their friends via their apps again. And code switching is not easy, and it can bring coping fatigue, confusion, and missteps and distractions. So I actually was having this conversation with my students via email communications, because like I said, I was seeing some really gnarly emails from my students. And I realized that even though we often require our students to communicate with us via email, they haven't all been explicitly taught how to compose an email. I had really fallen back on my own digital native thinking, just expecting that they should know how to compose an email to a teacher. So like subject line, what's that? A greeting, a forward body, a 4-page body, and really forget like any sort of closing, right? So I developed some very simple lessons on writing an email. So Jonathan's going to show us my favorite mistakes, which is one way that I taught this during hybrid teaching, which was by sharing some of my favorite mistakes. So in blue, I have shared with my students some of my favorite mistakes, and then in green, I revise them so they can see like, well, how would Ms. Meyer make that better? So the first one from a student says, I'm confused about why I have a 1 on gathering relevant information, and I also would like to make revisions on my bibliography. And so I said, well, what are you really asking here? Oh, you're asking if we could actually meet to talk about this. Maybe we can flesh this out a little bit further. So a request for a meeting. Or an email that just said, why is my score so low? And then how that might be revised for clearer communication. Or just an email that says, what did I miss? And again, a revision. I also, Jonathan will just scroll right through these. I'm happy to share this document with you if you'd like, but lots of examples from students and a couple that I might have written myself of example emails that really work when you are trying to email a teacher. So asking for an extension, missing class, wondering about your grade, those kinds of things that students email about. So these are all examples of like yeses on how to send an email to your teacher. And then I just like pulled out like, here's what works. I need a subject line. It needs to be short. It needs to be descriptive. There needs to be a greeting. Here are some examples of what that could look like. It needs to have a body. It really needs to have a closing, like anything, just put a closing. And then some pro tips for them about checking their email daily, getting back to people within 24 hours, those sorts of things. So this is how I taught my juniors how to write an email. And in the next slide, this is how I taught my Island Pathways students how to write an email. Same idea, a little bit different. This first one is, it's going to go down in my teacher memory as a moment so I've built out this kind of column structure for them. So I've got actual student emails in one column, then the students had to define why that was problematic, and then they had to revise it so that it wasn't problematic. And here's a great, this is just one of my favorites. This is whack. That's it. Right. So I just put some funny, well, they're funny to me, kind of, emails from students in here. And then the Island Pathway students will identify why that's problematic and revise it. And then I've got my favorite Google Classroom exchange here. Jonathan, if you just scroll down a little bit. Oh yeah, I really love that one too, like about my grade. But this is a Google Classroom exchange. I'm going to do the reading thing this weekend, and you're getting me in trouble with my parents. Take the 0 out now. And then 20 minutes later comes through, change it now. And then 20 minutes later comes through, change it. And so again, like we can all kind of giggle about that and have a little fun with it, but also identify that it's incredibly problematic and not how we would communicate with each other. And then finally, I would give them these scenarios, kind of like a digital dilemma. So choose a scenario and then send an email to Tammy, my ed tech at the time, and me, that's polite and professional. So they got to choose one of these scenarios, compose an actual email with that subject line, all completed, greeting, body, closing, and then try it out. And then Tammy and I could respond to our students. Again, it's okay to have fun with this. This can be kind of a light and funny thing. We always get a good laugh over this is whack. We talked about closings, and I begged them. I was like, please, just anything, like any sort of like, thank you so much, Miss Meyer, or like, have a nice day, or something. Just have a closing. And if you had this particular student who used this closing, you will recognize it immediately. This was one of my favorite closings from one of my juniors. She always signed her emails "Cupcakes and Unicorns for Jesus," and I just thought it was adorable. It made me smile every single time I saw her email. And so I'm sure if you've had her, you are picturing her right now and just how adorably sweet she is. And that is how I teach digital citizenship in my curriculum.
Okay, so we mentioned that the discussion norms that are in place can be really helpful. They apply to what Kate was just describing, which I think is a great example of student-created content. Mind you, they weren't necessarily aware that they were creating content at the time, but I shared with Kate that one of my student favorites was WTF as the subject, or as the entire email. We discussed why that was not necessarily the best choice, and it offers just a really authentic opportunity to have this. But it can also devolve pretty quickly into like, oh, you idiot, right? Like things go south fast. So even in that sort of seemingly light place, having these discussion norms, the speak your truth, respect others' viewpoints, don't interrupt, and disagree respectfully, can be a helpful framework. So as we said, those came directly from Common Sense Education. This is a slide from one of the presentations, but they move on to really expand this in the grade 12 lesson about civil communication and civil discourse. So first thing I want to observe is that this lesson, many of the lessons are connected to the program Nearpod, or the platform Nearpod. If it's not one you're familiar with, effectively it lets you turn Google Slides and similar content into interactive lessons. It is incredibly valuable in terms of in-person, hybrid, full remote, it doesn't matter. It's a wonderful, wonderful tool. I don't work for them. I just really like what they do. And next month, we'll share with you, we're going to use some of the Nearpod lessons with you to see how it works. It's another one of these tools that works across the curriculum. It doesn't need to be about digital citizenship, but we were really impressed with what they've pulled together, and they've done it for nearly 100% of their Common Sense Education lessons. So as a platform, you can take, as a content subject, you take the slideshow they have, but you plug it into effectively or access it through the Nearpod platform, and we'll show you how to do that next month. The other question that came to me immediately in this was, why am I talking about civil discourse or civil conversations in the digital citizenship sphere? And what occurred to me is a couple of things. One is, we realize increasingly the lack of distinction students have between what I think of as IRL and online. And for them, there's a fluidity to that and a back and forth that doesn't really exist as a clear distinction. So if that's the case, then the digital and digital citizenship, from my perspective, should go away. It's just citizenship. How do we want to show up? And if we think about, Kate has shared some of the experiences that she's familiar with around your area, but in the newspaper, people's comments back and forth and how they're treating one another in the comments column, how school committee meetings have gone or not gone as a result of behaviors, right? That is all happening in online spheres and in person interchangeably. So why are we saying it is exclusively a digital citizenship or in-person issue? The same impetuses, the same sort of lack of filters, the same kind of dehumanization that's happening is at its core influencing both spheres. So for us, we felt like this fluidity was actually a good thing and a great opportunity to have that conversation about why is this happening in so many different areas. So here, the key focus is on, we know the power of words and actions. And it is framed with these 3 learning objectives: define civil discourse and identify why it can be challenging, especially on the internet; analyze resources to identify the causes and effects of uncivil online discourse; and learn strategies for civil discourse and apply them to a scenario involving uncivil discourse. And if we haven't made this clear, every single Common Sense Education lesson has this. So they'll name the learning objectives for you, and whether or not you choose to show the slide, it can give you a really nice sense of where you might end up at the end of this conversation. They define civil discourse as conversation that involves respectful sharing and debate of ideas. And they offer this video with Cameron to give you an opportunity to talk about the nature of civil discourse and sort of why it's important and what happens when it goes awry or when it goes well. So it's a terrific video. We didn't feel like it was one we needed to share with you, because if this isn't an area that you want to explore immediately, you can come back to it later on. But it does raise a really nice opportunity for us of inter-theme conversations. So for example, teaching civil discourse in the context of one of the other areas we've talked about or will talk about, using this idea of the importance of civil discourse in a social studies class, in an English class, so that there's a kind of wraparound quality. In the same way that we're engaging parents, we're engaging them as students to think about these civil discourse norms applying across the board. So the video is a nice place to start for that, if it's of interest to you. The way that it's
My name is Cameron Cass.
the way that it is framed is what are some of the big takeaways from this student, is Cameron Caskey, his story, and what does Caskey say about debating with people who disagree with you, and do you agree with him about his point of view, which has to do effectively with what happens when we actively listen to people that disagree with us, and what happens when we are willing to actually engage with them and not just kind of cover our ears and ignore what they have to say. Wow,
My name is Cameron Cass.
That video. It also then offers the opportunity to analyze strategies that people can use to have civil discourse. And at the risk of dating myself, we are going to depart here from the Common Sense Education Materials curriculum with this reference of going to 11. By which I mean, we are going completely off the rails here from what Common Sense Education suggests, because for me, this is a huge passion area. I am really, really interested in encouraging civil discourse with my students. I'm the advisor to the civil rights team. I serve on the DEI committee, and it is right at my core of key values for teaching. So I have all kinds of resources I want to share with you and want to give you an opportunity to explore. And for me, I'm hoping I'm demonstrating to you, once again, it does not matter what your content is, as long as the conversation is taking place. So this one goes to 11 means I'm going off the dial. I'm cranking it all the way up past anything Common Sense Education has to suggest, and giving you 4 places to take a look. And in a moment, we'll give you an opportunity to dive into these yourself. The first is the National Council for Social Studies. They talk about really norming conversation sort of expectations in your classroom and utilizing them across the board. So they give you kind of a quick 3 steps to civil discourse, and they also give you a guide to turn over to students. That is like a kid-facing guide, not for teachers, but for them to utilize as a resource and to share with them to think about. So all these turquoise lines are links, and Kate will share the slides with you in just a moment so you can peruse them. The second place I would suggest you take a look is the New York Times, and that is because they have activities that you can drop into literally anything. And what I mean by that is, in the second example there, approve or reject. They give you an article with comments, and then you have the option to, as the editor, approve or reject the comments based on their content. And it is a perfect example of distancing it from the people in your classroom, right? It's like more objective, but the skill set and the focus is exactly where you want it. Is this person worthy of publishing their comment, or is there something problematic in it that means that we shouldn't? And what conversation arises from that? There's also this really nice 10 ways to encourage civil discourse on difficult issues that offers almost like a checklist. It's a really straightforward, very quick hit, and you could put it up on the board and talk about all 10 in 15 minutes as just kind of a jump starting place for these conversations. The third one I wanted to highlight for you is Facing History and Ourselves. I know you guys as a district have worked with this program and are familiar with it. They offer something called Fostering Civil Discourse, helping you prepare students to engage in reflective conversations on topics that matter. This is a more in-depth reflection, and if you know anything about the program, really, really thoughtful in terms of helping you frame conversations in ways that will be as effective as possible and really, really meaningful when they then are able to replicate those skills and take them into other areas besides outside of whichever classroom those conversations have begun. And then finally, the fourth resource is from what used to be called Teaching Tolerance. You may be familiar with it as that. It is now called Learning for Justice, exact same organization reframed because they wanted to expand and redefine what the work that they were actually doing as reflected by their title. So they're doing more than teaching tolerance now, they're really dealing with broader justice issues. It is the same group of people, the same great work. It just has a broader kind of branding, I guess I would say. They offer what is literally a book, like a whole book, a free PDF, which is linked there at the bottom. Chapter 1, Civil Discourse in the Classroom and Beyond. 2, Building Blocks for Civil Discourse. 3, Talk It Over. And 4, Teaching Controversy. It is like amazing. It is such, if I had to send you just one thing and you had the time to do it, this book is it. It is brilliant. I can't believe it's free. And it's really just as good a resource as I could possibly imagine offering you. So what we're going to ask you to do now, oh, sorry, and it looks like that when you download it, is to think about what these resources might offer to you as a teacher in teaching and facilitating civil discourse in your classroom. So by that, I mean, how might you direct instruct the skills of civil discourse and how might you actually conduct civil discourse in your classrooms? So as you dive into the various resources, keep track of any ideas that would help you teach or facilitate a civil discourse focus, an actual conversation in your classroom. And we're going to ask you in about 10 minutes to come back and join us again and share in a really brief way what you've been discovering. So Kate has put into the slides, into the comments, those 4 slides I just showed you. All the blue links are live. Go ahead and turn off your camera and take a look. Dive into any one in depth or peruse them as you might in a bookstore. And then we'll call you back in at say 4:40 to reflect on that and share a little bit about what you found.
So we are actually going to use an EduProtocol. An EduProtocol is a lesson frame. And so it's a protocol. It's a little lesson frame protocol that is paired with technology. And it comes from these books, EduProtocols. Everybody at the DOE on my team kind of makes fun of me because it's like, Kate has a book for that. Well, of course I do. I'm an English teacher. So I've got the books for that. And I'm hoping to figure out a way to offer some professional development via an instructional grant around EduProtocols and how to use them. They can be used in all content areas at all grade levels. And I think they're really cool. And once you have them like under your belt, it's like lesson plans done. And moving on to content and then students being content creators, which is super important. So we're going to try one out today called Thin Slides. It's a very quick EduProtocol. It takes place on a Google slide deck, and it is asking the students or the participants to come up with one word, one image, put it on one slide, and to do that in 3 minutes. And then it kind of concludes with a quick class presentation where everybody presents their slide. They get 8 to 12 seconds to do so. It just goes in the order that your slide exists in the slide deck. So it's a nice, fast way to think about and process information. I'm thinking about using it next year when I return. So students go home, they watch my flipped lesson, which is of course brilliant. And then their homework is to do one thin slide, which should take them about 3 minutes. So nice, fast homework. And then starting the next class with that very fast presentation recap. So just something that throwing out there, one way to use it. So we are going to offer you a slide deck. It's just a blank template. It looks like this. You can use it for yourself in your own classroom and go do this Edu Protocol tomorrow. So you get the title and then a space to type in your prompt. And then every student will get a slide that looks like this. So they'll be prompted to type their name in, to insert one image, and to type in one word or phrase that is related to the prompt. And so Jonathan is going to give you the prompt, and then I will share a blank slide deck with everyone. You will just hop into that slide deck, claim your slide. If someone's on that slide, claim the next one, and then we'll set the timer and give you 3 minutes to come up with one image and one word or phrase in response to Jonathan's prompt.
You can't hear me, sorry about that. The subject matter is facilitating meaningful civil discourse, and the prompt is identify a requirement for civil discourse to occur. So Kate's going to give you the link. You're going to jump into a slide. Oh, I can do it. I have it set up. There it is.
I've got it. It was just slow.
It's in there. So click on that link, same link twice. Jump in, and you're picking one slide. As Kate said, if someone else is in the slide, just pick a different one. Don't be that guy that takes over someone else's slide. Funny. And then we'll come back in 3 minutes to share what you learned or what you selected.
And just a quick tech tip. I find the quickest way to insert images is to get on your slide and then go up to the toolbar at the top where it says insert, because you're going to be inserting an image. And if you go to image, it gives you the option to insert an image by searching the web. It opens the web up for you right in that same screen as Jonathan is showing. Thank you so much. So you never have to leave your slide. You can search for your image, click on it and insert it right there. Easy peasy.
Kate, I'm having a hard time. I'm on that slideshow with the original 4 slides, but I can't find the ones that continue on.
Oh, let me grab the link.
I'm showing just the most recent link. My computer cut out for a second, so maybe when you posted the link, it didn't post in my, oh yeah,
Yep.
okay, there it is. Thank you.
Yes.
Yeah, I lost you guys for a second. Okay,
No worries.
appreciate it.
Tabitha, starting with you.
I can't get my image over there still. I tried it both ways, the double click too, and I'm doing something wrong. I do keep having a thing, a screen pop up that my Zoom, so it keeps, I'm very frustrated right now. I hate computers. Anyway, so I was trying to do mutual respect, and I did find an image that was like a street sign that just talked about how respect is a two-way street. And I've lost all of you guys too now.
I'll take us to Cindy then.
Sorry.
No
No,
worries.
I can talk. I just can't hear. Let's see.
So I was thinking about really listening to the other people that are part of the discussion. So people need to listen with their mouth closed so they actually hear what other people are saying.
Might be.
So I was looking at various things and found that you need to have the intent to be civil. So the one was talking about you start yourself with, actually, I'm talking too much. That's it. Intent to be civil.
Josh?
RESPECT. That's where it starts.
Renee?
Honest Abe would say honesty. You have to be truthful in your things you are assert or evidence you give.
Ian? You're muted, Ian. Oh, it's even better silently. But Ian, you are muted. The interpretation of that was maybe as good as what you said.
I'm good topic. I hate to no. So I think norms are often glossed over or ignored in establishing, but I think it's so important having a civil conversation. And the first thing when I thought of norms that popped in my head was norm and field. That's right.
Megan?
So I chose compassion. I think that obviously if you're willing to listen to somebody else's side and somebody else's viewpoint, you need to have compassion in order to attempt to understand where they might be coming from, excuse me. And I'm terribly sorry that I am inept when it comes to inserting an image. So I apologize.
Please do not. It is a frustration we've all experienced. Beth?
I said empathy, kind of a segue from compassion.
Making sure I didn't miss anyone. Oh, my friend Payson Park. Great. Okay, so we really appreciate you bearing with us there. I think one of the things I learned very quickly in my role as a tech integrator is that I had to get really comfortable with discomfort because, you know, at least half the time something goes wildly awry. And I've shared with Kate that I actually fake it sometimes. That is, I publicly make mistakes in front of adults that I know are insecure about it so that they see that it's not as big a deal. So I encourage you, Kate and I were talking about how when something is, I don't know if you've ever had the bring your own device experience where you're like, as you can clearly see on my device, which looks totally different than your device, and then just having students kind of work with one another. Hey, iPhones, you go over there. Hey, Chromebooks, you go over there, collaborate with one another. It's a great model, and it is way more important that we get the content out there than how it actually, you know, transpires from a technological point of view. So thank you so much. We really hope that that protocol works for you as in some other areas as well. We think it's a really nice place to start any of these conversations about what do you think is the central component of, or the central, you know, question of blank, whatever you're talking about. And that this particular one we've created may serve as a place for you to jump off conversations with your own students. I was talking with some of my co-teachers, my colleagues, and we developed this list of things that we thought were critical to civil discourse. How do those work for you? Do you agree? Do those make sense? Do you think we need to add things? Should we subtract them? Should we combine them? And then kind of tweaking that existing slide deck, we wondered too about maybe coming back to it each month and seeing how your norms are going. Are there ones we have to emphasize or expand? Are the ones we can delete? Are the ones we need to add? Going back one more time to this concept of the student created content, the authenticity of that in their telling you what the norms are is invaluable in Kate, my experience, that you can then say, as many of us have, you know, that's something we agreed on. And if that's meaningful, if you really have done that work, it is much harder to argue with you that the behavior that you know is not acceptable is acceptable because we've all had that conversation in advance. So we'll see you again on Valentine's Day. All of you bring your own cupcakes because I can't deliver them to you, unfortunately. And so perfectly, we'll be discussing hate speech and love speech, of course, too. Cyberbullying, digital drama, and hate speech is our subject on the 14th at 3:30. Until then, have a lovely month, and we'll see you then.
Thank you.
Bye, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.